I'm Aurora Hayes, 32, and last month I got the same message I receive every year. Sorry, dear, not enough room for you at the Rocky Mountain Getaway this year. Hours later, I found out my parents had invited 118 people, all 6 of my brothers and sisters with their families, in-laws, cousins, and even friends of friends. For years, I felt like the forgotten child. Even with my successful art career, it was clear the exclusion was on purpose. This year, I decided things would be different. Before I continue, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever felt like the family outsider. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The Rocky Mountain Family Getaway wasn't just any trip. It was a cherished tradition started by my grandparents, Eleanor and Robert Hayes, almost 40 years ago. When I was little, Grandpa Robert would tell stories about how he and Grandma fell in love with the clear mountain streams and tall trees during their honeymoon. One day, he'd say with a twinkle in his eye, "This will be our family's special place." True to his word, they bought the large mountain property when I was just 6 years old. That property became the setting for countless childhood memories. I remember racing down to the private lake with my siblings every summer morning, our laughter echoing across the water. My oldest brother, Jake, would organize big scavenger hunts throughout the 10-acre property, while my sisters, Sophia and Camila, would help Grandma prepare huge family meals in the cozy open kitchen. The twins, Blake and Brian, were always getting into trouble climbing the tallest trees. And my youngest sister, Lily, was Grandpa's shadow, following him as he worked in the gardens. But it was me that Grandpa Robert would take on special art walks around the property. He noticed my love for drawing before anyone else did. "You see the world differently, Aurora," he'd say as I sketched the mountains reflected in the lake. "You have a gift." He'd set up a small easel for me on the porch, and sometimes he'd sit quietly beside me for hours as I painted, offering gentle encouragement. "Your art will take you places," Grandpa would say. "Don't let anyone tell you it's not a worthy path." When I announced my decision to go to art school instead of the business program my parents had chosen, Grandpa and Grandma were my only supporters. My father, Richard Hayes, CEO of a regional banking chain, didn't hide his disappointment. "Artists don't pay mortgages," he declared at dinner. My mother, Patricia, always his echo, nodded in agreement. The summer after my second year of college, both grandparents passed away within months of each other. Their absence left a huge hole in our family, but they made sure their beloved Rocky Mountain property would keep us together. They left it jointly to my parents with a letter saying they wished the annual family gatherings would continue. And continue they did, though the atmosphere changed. My parents took over organizing the getaways, turning what had been relaxed, joyful gatherings into increasingly formal events. Guest lists grew beyond immediate family to include my father's business partners and my mother's social friends. What was once a place of real connection became a networking opportunity. Despite my parents' disapproval of my career choice, I worked tirelessly through art school, taking on freelance design projects while my classmates partied. By graduation, I already had an impressive portfolio and client list. Today, I run my own successful design studio, with clients ranging from new tech companies to well-known luxury brands. But my professional achievements never seemed to matter to my parents. The first year I was left out of the getaway was 3 years ago. The message came 2 weeks before the event. "Honey, we're keeping it small this year, just immediate family. Not enough room, maybe next summer." I was hurt, but made excuses for them in my mind. Maybe they really were cutting back. Maybe they needed family time with just my siblings. I told myself it didn't matter, though I cried myself to sleep that night. The truth came out through social media. Photos of not just my siblings, but extended family, family friends, and business partners, nearly 60 people in total. When I casually mentioned seeing the photos to my sister Sophia, she became defensive. "Mom and Dad just thought you'd be busy with work. You're always so busy." Each of my siblings has their own relationship with our parents. Jake, the oldest at 38, followed Dad into banking and lives close to our parents with his wife and 3 children. He's the golden child who can do no wrong. Sophia, 36, married a doctor and is the perfect corporate wife, just like our mother. The twins, Blake and Brian, 34, both became lawyers at Dad's urging and work for the same big firm. Camilla, 30, is a pediatrician married to another doctor, a respectable job in my parents' eyes. And Lily, the youngest at 28, is a teacher who married her college sweetheart, a financial advisor. Then there's me, single at 32, no children, running a creative business instead of having a real job, as my father calls it, the black sheep, the disappointment. For 2 years in a row, the pattern repeated. Each time the not enough room message arrived, and each time social media showed the lie. I pretended not to care, focusing on my growing business and trying to convince myself that it didn't hurt. But this year was different. I wasn't ready for what I found while casually scrolling through Instagram one evening in early June. My brother Blake had posted a photo of a printed guest list for the upcoming getaway. "Getting excited for the biggest family gathering yet," read the caption. I zoomed in on the paper, and there it was, a detailed schedule for activities divided into groups. And at the top, 118 confirmed guests. 118 people. And somehow still not enough for one more. My hand trembled as I stared at Blake's post. 118 guests. I counted the names I could make out on the blurry image. All 6 of my siblings, their spouses, their children. I saw cousins I hadn't seen in years, my mother's sister and her entire family, even my father's former college roommate and his wife. Everyone but me. I immediately texted Blake. "Getaway looks amazing. Huge group this year." His response came quickly. "Yeah, gonna be epic. Mom and Dad went all out." I forced myself to sound casual. "Wow, 118 people. Must be using every inch of the property. How do you know the exact number?" Dad's been stressing about accommodating everyone. Had to rent 2 neighboring properties to handle the overflow. My stomach dropped. They'd rented additional properties. The not enough room excuse completely fell apart. I set my phone down and walked to my apartment window, staring out at the city skyline as tears streamed down my face. It wasn't about room. It never had been. The physical reaction was immediate. My chest tightened, my breathing became shallow. I slid down against the wall until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees. For nearly an hour, I couldn't move, replaying years of subtle exclusions and dismissals. The time my art won a national competition and my parents skipped the ceremony for one of the twins' baseball games. The Christmas when everyone received thoughtful gifts while I got a generic gift card. The family photos where I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out. When I could finally move again, I called my best friend, Ellie. We'd met in art school and had been each other's support system ever since. She answered on the second ring. "They did it again," I said, my voice breaking. "The getaway." "Oh, Aurora." Her voice was soft with understanding. 118 people, Ellie. They rented extra properties to fit everyone. That's beyond hurtful. That's deliberately cruel. Am I overreacting? Maybe there's a reason. "Stop," Ellie interrupted firmly. "This isn't about space, and you know it. This is about control and punishment. They're punishing you for living a life they didn't choose." Deep down, I knew she was right. My parents had never forgiven me for choosing art over business, for building a life that didn't align with their vision. But acknowledging the truth didn't lessen the pain. That night, memories of previous family gatherings flooded back. The Thanksgiving when my father introduced all my siblings' professional accomplishments, but described me simply as still doing her art thing. The Mother's Day brunch where my mother gushed about wanting more grandchildren, then looked at me and said, "Of course, you need to find a husband first." Always the subtle digs, the little reminders that I wasn't quite meeting expectations. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations and imagining confrontations that would never happen. Around 3 a.m., I called Sophia, knowing she'd be up feeding her newborn. "Do you know I wasn't invited to the Rocky Mountains?" I asked without preamble. A pause. "Mom mentioned you were busy with work. Did you question that? Did anyone ask me if I was busy? Aurora, you know how it is. Mom and Dad handled the invitations." They invited over 100 people, Sophia. They rented extra properties. Another longer pause. Look, you know they don't really understand your lifestyle. Maybe if you made more effort to connect with them. My lifestyle? You mean my successful business? My award-winning work? The fact that I support myself doing something I love? That's not what I meant, she backpedaled. It's just you're different. You always have been. Different doesn't mean I deserve to be excluded from my own family. Maybe call Mom tomorrow, Sophia suggested weakly. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I hung up without responding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, and I had been allowing it to continue. Morning came after a sleepless night, and with it, clarity. The sun streamed through my window as I made coffee, lighting up the awards and framed client testimonials on my wall. I'd built something meaningful on my own terms. I'd honored my grandparents' belief in me, and I'd been seeking approval from people who would never give it. An idea began to form, not of a fight or begging to be included, but of something totally different. If my family couldn't make space for me, maybe it was time to create my own space, my own way. My first thought was pure anger, to call my parents and finally let out years of hurt, to post the truth on social media for our whole family to see, to show up uninvited at the Rocky Mountains and force a confrontation. But as I sipped my morning coffee, staring at the photo of my grandparents on my desk, I knew those reactions wouldn't honor who I was or what they had taught me. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time, my grandmother used to say, quoting Maya Angelou. My parents had shown me repeatedly where I stood. No amount of fighting would change that basic truth. Instead of letting anger control me, I called Chloe, my former professor turned mentor in the design world. Over video chat, I told her the whole story, my voice sometimes breaking. I just don't know what to do with these feelings, I finished. I can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt. Chloe adjusted her iconic red glasses and leaned closer to the camera. You're a creator, Aurora. When faced with destruction, creators build. When faced with exclusion, they include. When faced with small-mindedness, they respond with greatness. What exactly are you suggesting? If I were you, she said with a small smile, I'd put this energy into creating something amazing, something that would make your grandparents proud and remind you of your own worth. After our call, I found myself looking up fancy properties around the Rocky Mountains. If my family could rent extra places, why couldn't I? I wasn't trying to compete, but the idea of creating my own getaway, my own tradition, suddenly felt powerful. That's when I found it. Mountain View Estate, a stunning property just 15 minutes from my family's place. 6 bedrooms, amazing mountain views, private hiking trails, and, importantly, available for the exact week of the family getaway. The rental price made me gasp, but I had been saving for a down payment on a condo. This felt more important. The next day, I had lunch with my client, Hazel, who owned a successful event planning business. I designed her brand and website the year before, and we'd become friends. You're really going to do this? She asked after I told her my idea. Create an entire alternative getaway? Not just any getaway, I explained, my excitement growing. A creative minds retreat. I could invite friends, clients, fellow designers, people who appreciate creative work. We could have workshops, outdoor activities, amazing food. Everything my grandparents' retreats used to have before they became my parents' networking events. Hazel's eyes lit up. I love it, and I want to help. This is literally what I do for a living. We spent the afternoon brainstorming. Hazel suggested local chefs she'd worked with who could create gourmet meals. I thought of artists and designers who could lead workshops. We planned out possible activities, sunset yoga on the deck, guided hikes, evening bonfires with music and stories. You'll need a website and social media presence, Hazel said. Make it look professional, even exclusive. I can handle that part, I smiled, already imagining the design. Over the next week, I took 2 weeks of vacation from my studio, moved a large part of my savings to cover the first deposit on the property, and created a beautiful digital invitation. The invite list needed careful thought. Ellie was first, of course, then other close friends from art school and the design world, clients who had become friends over the years, my college roommate and her husband. After some thought, I also decided to invite Camilla and Jake, my two siblings who had sometimes shown support for my career and who might appreciate the offer. With each name I added, my excitement grew. These were people who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they wanted me to be. People who celebrated my successes rather than making them seem smaller. People who made space for me in their lives. I built a website for the retreat, complete with stunning pictures of the property, detailed descriptions of the planned activities, and professional bios of the workshop leaders I'd secured. I created private social media accounts that attendees could follow for updates. Everything was designed with the care and artistic touch that had built my reputation in the industry. Of course, doubts crept in during quiet moments. What if no one came? What if the people I invited saw it as a sad attempt to create a substitute family? What if the whole thing was a financial disaster that left me broke and embarrassed? But each time these thoughts came up, I reminded myself of what was at stake: my self-respect, my power, my refusal to keep accepting exclusion as what I deserved. I couldn't control my family's actions, but I could control my response to them, and I chose to respond by creating something beautiful. 2 weeks after Blake's revealing Instagram post, I had confirmed 22 guests for my Creative Minds retreat, planned for the exact same week as my family's gathering. Camilla had accepted with enthusiasm, writing, "This sounds amazing, Aurora, so much more my speed than the formal family thing." Jake had politely declined, with a kind note explaining that he couldn't miss the family event with his kids involved, but he appreciated the invitation. As I finished the details, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for years. Not anger or hurt, but a calm sense of purpose. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their exclusion. I was creating my own inclusion. Getting the Mountain View estate turned out to be just the first step in a process more complicated than I'd expected. The property was magnificent, a modern masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Rocky Mountains' clear waters, a gourmet kitchen that would make any chef envious, large outdoor living spaces, and even private access to hiking trails. But turning this stunning space into the retreat I imagined required attention to countless details. Hazel became my helper, using her event planning connections to get services at good rates. Together, we hired a local catering company specializing in fresh local food, arranged for daily housekeeping, and even hired a professional photographer to capture the experience. People should see what you're creating, Hazel insisted, not just your family, but everyone who's ever been made to feel not enough. Each day after finishing my client work, I'd spend evenings planning workshop materials and coordinating with the artists and designers I'd invited to lead sessions. Miranda, a famous ceramic artist, would guide a pottery workshop on the property's back patio. Troy, a nature photographer, would lead early morning photo expeditions. Ellie would lead a session on creative journaling. I wanted the retreat to be everything my grandparents had valued: creativity, connection, joy, and realness. I remembered how Grandpa Robert would organize stargazing nights on the dock, telling stories about constellations as we huddled under blankets, how Grandma Eleanor would arrange wildflowers from the property in jars placed throughout the house. These weren't expensive gestures, but they were thoughtful ones that made everyone feel special. The money worries began to grow as payments were due. I took on extra client projects, working late into the night to make sure I could pay for the retreat without completely emptying my savings. There were moments when I questioned my decision. Was I taking this too far? Was I overreacting to years of exclusion by spending thousands of dollars on what might seem like a small-minded response? But then I'd receive an excited message from one of my invited guests saying how much they were looking forward to the retreat, and my resolve would strengthen. This wasn't about revenge. It was about creating joy where there had been hurt. 1 week before the retreat, disaster struck. The catering company called to tell me they had booked 2 events and couldn't work for us anymore. I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by welcome basket supplies I'd been putting together, fighting back tears of frustration. I can't believe this is happening. I told Ellie over the phone. What am I going to do? 22 people expecting gourmet meals for 5 days and suddenly no chef. Breathe, Ellie said calmly. This is fixable. Let me make some calls. Within hours, Ellie had connected me with Nora, a personal chef who had trained at a top cooking school. She was between jobs and available for the whole week. After looking at the menus I'd planned, Nora suggested improvements that would actually make the food experience better. What had seemed like a disaster had turned into an unexpected upgrade. The day before guests were set to arrive, I drove up to the Rocky Mountains with my car packed full of supplies. As I pulled into the circular driveway of Mountain View Estate, the afternoon sun lit up the property in golden light. For a moment, I sat in my car, overwhelmed by what I'd done and what was ahead. The property manager gave me a tour, explaining the house's features and handing over the keys. When he left, I stood alone in the great room, looking out at the mountains through the huge windows. This space was mine, at least for the next week, and I had the power to fill it with whatever energy I chose. I spent the afternoon preparing welcome baskets for each guest. Into large market baskets, I placed locally made soaps, small bottles of local wine, artisan chocolates, custom journals with the retreat logo I designed, and handwritten notes thanking each person for being part of my life. For Camilla's basket, I added a photo I'd found of the two of us as children painting together on Grandpa's porch. As I arranged the baskets in each bedroom, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Hope you're enjoying your summer, dear. Anything special planned for next week?" The text confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't even noticed that I was aware of being excluded. They expected me to remain ignorant, to accept the lies without question. Instead of responding, I took a photo of the sunset view from the deck and posted it to my Instagram with the caption, "Let the creative minds retreat begin." #emerging from the shadows. I knew my siblings followed my account. I knew word would spread. And for once, I didn't care. I was done hiding my hurt and pretending their actions didn't affect me. I was stepping into the light. The first guests arrived just before noon the next day. Ellie pulled up in her vintage car, followed closely by Troy and his partner, David. Their reactions as they entered the property showed that every dollar spent and hour invested was worth it. "Aurora, this is unbelievable," Ellie gasped, taking in the soaring ceilings and mountain views. "You've outdone yourself." Throughout the afternoon, the remaining guests trickled in. Some I hadn't seen in years, and our reunions were filled with real warmth. Everyone marveled at the property, the welcome baskets, the detailed plan I'd created for the week ahead. The energy in the house grew with each arrival, creating exactly the atmosphere I'd hoped for: creative, excited, joyful. Nora, the chef, arrived with help and began preparing our welcome dinner as I showed guests to their rooms and helped them settle in. By sunset, all 22 participants had arrived, including my sister Camila, who pulled me into a tight hug. "This is incredible," she whispered. "I had no idea you were planning something so amazing." "Did anyone else in the family notice my Instagram post?" I asked quietly. Camila's expression turned slightly uncomfortable. "Mom asked if I knew anything about it. I just said I'd be seeing you this week." I nodded, appreciating her discretion. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." Our first dinner was better than all expectations. Nora served a multi-course meal featuring locally sourced ingredients, each plate a work of art. We ate at a long table on the deck, string lights twinkling overhead, the conversation flowing as freely as the wine. I stood to welcome everyone officially, my heart full as I looked at the faces of people who had chosen to be there, who had made space for me in their lives. To creativity, to connection, and to creating our own traditions, I toasted, raising my glass. As the evening went on, I noticed guests taking photos and posting them on social media. By morning, my phone was buzzing with notifications, not just from retreat participants sharing their experiences, but from family members who had suddenly realized what I was doing. The first text came from Blake. "That place looks incredible. What's this retreat thing about?" Then Sophia. "Mom's asking why Camila is with you and not at the family gathering, just FYI." I chose not to respond immediately, focusing instead on the morning's activities. We began with sunrise yoga on the deck, led by David, who was a certified instructor. After a breakfast of fresh fruit and homemade pastries, Troy led the first group on a photography hike, while Miranda set up her pottery wheels on the patio for the remaining guests. Throughout the day, I was too busy and truly involved to check my phone often, but when I did, the messages had multiplied. My brother Brian had texted, "Saw your posts, looks amazing, didn't know you were planning something for this week." The hidden meaning was clear. He was wondering why he hadn't been invited. The most surprising event happened on the third day of the retreat. We were returning from a boat tour of the lake when I saw an elegant, older woman waiting on the dock. It took me a moment to recognize my grandmother's sister, Eleanor, after whom I had been named. "Great Aunt Eleanor, what are you doing here?" I exclaimed, helping her to her feet. "I saw photos of this place on that Instagram thing," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Recognized the view. I was supposed to be at your parents' gathering, but this looked far more interesting." At 84, Great Aunt Eleanor had always been the family rebel, traveling the world as a journalist when most women of her generation were expected to stay home. She had been close to my grandparents and had always shown special interest in my creative pursuits. That evening, Eleanor and I sat on the deck after most guests had gone to bed, sharing a bottle of her favorite scotch. "Your grandparents would be proud of you," she said suddenly. "Not just for this," she gestured at the property, "but for staying true to yourself despite Richard and Patricia's disapproval." "You know about that?" I asked, surprised. "Of course I do. I've watched them favor your siblings for years." Robert and Eleanor saw it too. It broke their hearts. The confirmation from someone who had known and loved my grandparents brought unexpected tears. "I've tried so hard to earn their approval," I admitted. "Some people's approval isn't worth earning," Eleanor said firmly. "Your grandparents understood that creativity isn't just a career choice, it's a way of seeing the world. They saw that in you from the beginning." The conversation with Eleanor made me feel calm, reminding me why I'd created the retreat in the first place. It wasn't about proving something to my parents. It was about honoring the parts of myself they couldn't or wouldn't value. The next day, as we were gathered for lunch, my phone rang with my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately. On the third call, I excused myself and answered. "Aurora, where are you?" My mother's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Eleanor was supposed to arrive at the retreat yesterday, but she's not answering her phone." "She's here, Mom." "With me?" A long silence followed. "What do you mean with you? Where is here?" "I'm hosting my own retreat this week. Great Aunt Eleanor decided to join us instead." "You're in the Rocky Mountains?" The shock in her voice was almost funny. "But we told you there wasn't enough space." "I know exactly what you told me," I interrupted, keeping my voice steady. "And I know you invited 118 people and rented additional properties. I decided to make my own space." Another long pause. "We need to talk about this. Your father and I are coming over." Before I could protest, she had hung up. I returned to the group, trying to stay calm, but Ellie immediately noticed something was wrong. "My parents are coming here," I explained quietly. "They just found out where I am." Ellie squeezed my hand. "We've got your back, all of us." An hour later, my parents' car pulled into the driveway. I met them outside, not wanting to disturb the workshop happening in the great room. My mother looked me up and down, taking in the property behind me with narrowed eyes. "What exactly is going on here, Aurora?" "I'm hosting a creative retreat for friends and colleagues," I replied calmly. "Since I wasn't welcome at the family gathering, I made alternative plans." "Not welcome?" My father's face reddened. "We simply said there wasn't enough space for one person." I finished for him. "While you invited 118 others and rented extra properties. Let's not pretend this was about space, Dad." My mother's expression changed between anger and embarrassment. "We thought you'd be busy with work. You're always so focused on your projects." "My projects are my career, Mom, a successful career that you and Dad have never acknowledged." The words I'd held back for years finally came out. Not in an emotional outburst, but as clear facts. You've excluded me from family events for 3 years running. You've made my achievements seem small while celebrating my siblings. You've made it clear where I stand in the family hierarchy. My father started to speak, then stopped, looking past me at the house. Through the windows, the retreat participants were visible, busy in Miranda's clay workshop, laughing and creating together. "Who are all these people?" he asked. "People who value me," I said simply. "Friends, colleagues, clients, people who make space for me in their lives. And Camilla's here too," I added, watching their expressions change. "She chose to come to my retreat instead of yours." My mother's face crumpled slightly at this news. "Aurora, if you felt excluded, you should have said something." "Would it have made a difference?" I asked quietly. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father at a loss for words. He looked around at the magnificent property, taking in what I had organized, what I had created from their rejection. "Perhaps we should talk about this privately," he finally said. "No," I replied firmly. "I'm hosting an event. My guests deserve my attention. If you'd like to join us for dinner tonight, you're welcome to. As guests, not as parents coming to scold their child." They exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this version of me, confident, established, setting boundaries. "Dinner is at 7, I added, then turned to go back inside. "Aurora," my father called after me. I paused, but didn't turn around. "This is impressive what you've done here." It wasn't an apology, but coming from Richard Hayes, it was important. I nodded once and continued into the house where my chosen family waited. My parents did come to dinner that night. They were stiff and uncomfortable at first, but Great Aunt Eleanor's presence helped ease the tension. They met my friends, heard about my professional achievements from others' points of view, and saw firsthand the respect I commanded in my world. By the end of the evening, something had shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. As they were leaving, my mother said, "Next year, we'll make sure there's space for you at the family retreat." I smiled politely, but made no promises. I had created something too valuable to give up. Over the next 2 days, messages came in from my siblings. Reactions were mixed. Brian seemed offended he wasn't invited, while Lily was simply confused. Sophia was defensive of our parents, while Jake sent a thoughtful message acknowledging that the family hadn't always been fair to me. The most surprising response came from Blake, who showed up unannounced on our last full day. "I told Mom and Dad I needed a break from the chaos," he explained, "but really I wanted to see what you've created here. It looks amazing online." I gave him a tour, introduced him to my friends, and invited him to join our closing dinner. Watching him interact with my creative friends, I saw glimpses of the curious boy he'd been before our parents' expectations had narrowed his path. As the retreat neared its end, the success was clear. Participants were already asking about next year. Professional connections had formed that would lead to collaborations. And I had proven to myself, most of all, that I could create meaningful traditions on my own terms. The final morning of the retreat arrived with a mix of happiness and sadness. As guests enjoyed a relaxed breakfast on the deck, I noticed a familiar car pulling into the driveway. My parents had returned, this time with my sister Sophia in tow. I excused myself and met them outside, determined to keep the boundaries I'd set. "We thought we'd help you pack up," my mother offered, her attempt at a casual tone failing. "That's not necessary," I replied. "We have everything handled." Sophia stepped forward. "Aurora, can we talk privately?" I hesitated, then nodded, leading them to a secluded corner of the property's garden. The morning sun filtered through the trees, creating soft shadows on the ground between us. "This has gotten out of hand," Sophia began. "You've made Mom and Dad feel terrible." "That wasn't my intention," I said honestly. "I simply decided to stop accepting exclusion as what I deserved." "There was a misunderstanding about space," my mother started. "Mom," I interrupted gently but firmly, "we both know it wasn't about space. It's never been about space." My father, unusually quiet, finally spoke. "You're right." The simple admission hung in the air between us. My mother looked at him in surprise. "You're right?" he repeated, meeting my eyes directly. "We've favored your siblings. We've dismissed your career. We've excluded you because we've been disappointed that you didn't follow the path we wanted for you." His honesty, however painful, was refreshing. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said. "But this," he gestured toward the house, "this event you've created with these successful people who clearly respect you, it's made me realize we've been wrong." My mother dabbed of her eyes with a tissue. "We didn't understand your world, Aurora. It seemed so unstable compared to what your siblings chose." "You never tried to understand," I pointed out. "You never came to my gallery showings or asked about my clients or celebrated my achievements." "You're right about that too," my father admitted. "And he stumbled over the words, I'm sorry." Coming from Richard Hayes, those words were as rare as snow in July. I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "I can't promise things will change overnight," he continued, "but I'd like to try to understand your world better." Sophia looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with our father's unusual honesty. "So, will you come to the family retreat next year?" she asked, trying to move past the emotional moment. I considered her question carefully. "I'm not sure. I might host my own retreat again. It's been healing." "Perhaps we could coordinate the dates so they don't conflict. You could attend both, or at least part of each." It was a small offer of peace, but a real one. "I'd consider that." At that moment, Ellie appeared at the garden entrance. "Sorry to interrupt, but we're ready for the closing circle whenever you are." "I'll be right there," I told her, then turned back to my family. "You're welcome to join us for our closing ceremony if you'd like, as participants, not observers." To my surprise, my father nodded. "We'd like that." As we walked back to the house, Sophia whispered, "Blake hasn't stopped talking about yesterday. He said it was the most relaxed he's felt in years." The closing circle was a tradition I'd borrowed from my art school days, a chance for participants to share thoughts on their experience. We gathered in the great room, sitting on cushions in a circle, each person taking turns to speak. When it came to my parents' turn, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm not much for public speaking unless it's about money reports," he began, causing gentle laughter. "But I want to thank Aurora for allowing us to be part of this. It's opened my eyes to a world I didn't understand before." After the ceremony, as guests began to pack and exchange contact information, my parents pulled me aside. "We'd like you to come to dinner next week," my mother said. "Just us, to talk more." I agreed, but added, "I need you to understand something. I'm not going to change who I am or what I do to earn your approval. That's not on the table." "We know," my father said, surprising me again. "Maybe it's we who need to change." After they left, I rejoined my guests for our final lunch. Great Aunt Eleanor sat beside me, her eyes twinkling with mischief and wisdom. "You know," she said, taking a sip of her iced tea, "sometimes the family you create is more important than the family you're born into." I looked around at the table filled with people who had chosen to spend a week supporting and celebrating each other. "I think you're right," I said. "But," she added, patting my hand, "it's nice when both can coexist. Give them a chance, Aurora, not for their sake, but for yours." As guests left throughout the afternoon, the house grew quieter. Camila was among the last to leave, pulling me into a tight hug. "This was life-changing," she said. "I've been so caught up in meeting Mom and Dad's expectations that I forgot what it feels like to just create, to play, to connect truly. You're welcome at my table anytime," I told her. Blake had extended his unplanned visit and helped load the last of the supplies into my car. As we closed up the house, he said, "I'm sorry, Aurora." "For what?" "For not seeing what was happening to you, for going along with it." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the corporate lawyer our parents had made, but the boy who used to build detailed sandcastles with me at the lake. "Maybe we can all do better moving forward," I suggested. By sunset, I was alone on the deck of Mountain View Estate, watching the golden light fade from the water. The retreat had been a success beyond my expectations, not just professionally or socially, but personally. I had changed exclusion into inclusion, rejection into creation, hurt into healing. I didn't know what would happen with my family moving forward. Decades of patterns couldn't be undone in a single weekend. But for the first time in years, there seemed to be an opening, a willingness to see me as I was, not as they wished I would be. As I locked the door of the property for the final time, I felt a deep sense of thanks for my grandparents who had recognized my creative spirit, for friends who had supported my vision, and even for the exclusion that had forced me to create something uniquely mine. Whatever happened next, I knew this truth. I would never again make myself smaller to fit into spaces too narrow to hold all of who I was. The drive back to the city gave me time to think about everything that had happened. The mountain roads wound down from the elevation, each curve bringing me closer to my everyday life, but with a new viewpoint. The retreat hadn't just been a one-week event, it had been a turning point. When I arrived home, my apartment felt different, not physically, but energetically. The space that had witnessed my tears of exclusion now held the confidence of someone who had changed rejection into creation. I unpacked slowly, each retreat item, the leftover welcome basket supplies, the printed plans, the group photos, a clear reminder of what I'd achieved. The responses from guests began coming in the next day. Email after email expressed thanks, described creative breakthroughs, and asked about next year's retreat. Troy wrote that he'd secured a major photography exhibition after showing his mountain shots to a gallery owner. Miranda mentioned that 2 retreat participants had asked for large ceramic pieces for their homes. Ellie called to say she'd already started a group chat for Creative Minds Retreat alumni. What had begun as a response to exclusion had become something with a life of its own, a community, a tradition, a testament to the power of creating your own table when you're not offered a seat at someone else's. The promised dinner with my parents came the following week. I arrived at their city home with careful hope but firm boundaries. The conversation was awkward at times, with decades of patterns not easily broken, but there was a clear shift. My father actually asked questions about my business, real questions that showed genuine interest. My mother showed me a ceramic bowl she'd bought from a local artist, asking for my opinion on the blazing technique. "We've been talking," my father said over dessert, "about the family retreat." I waited, expecting them to press me again about attending next year. "We think it's gotten away from what your grandparents intended," he continued. "Too many people, too formal, too much about networking." "Next year," my mother added, "we're scaling back, just immediate family, the way it used to be." I nodded, appreciating the gesture, but not ready to commit. "That sounds nice." And, my father cleared his throat, "We'd like to come to your retreat next year, just for a day or two, if that would be all right, to see your world more fully." The request surprised me. Richard and Patricia Hayes voluntarily entering a space with artists, designers, and creative business owners? It wasn't an apology for years of exclusion, but it was a step toward understanding. "I'd like that," I said, simply. The weeks that followed brought healing conversations with some siblings and continued tension with others. Camila and I began meeting weekly for coffee, reconnecting as adults in a way we never had growing up. Jake invited me to his son's art show at school, a small gesture that meant more than he probably realized. Blake called occasionally, asking questions about my work with a curiosity that seemed genuine. Sophia remained defensive of our parents, unwilling to acknowledge the family dynamics that had hurt me. Brian and Lily kept their distance, perhaps unsure how to navigate the changing family landscape. I accepted these varied responses, understanding that each sibling had their own relationship with our parents and with me. I also began seeing a therapist, something I'd considered for years but had always put off with work excuses. Dr. Michaels helped me understand the family patterns, how being the different child had both wounded me and strengthened me, how seeking parental approval had driven me but also limited me. The retreat was a key moment, she observed during one session. You stopped asking for inclusion and created it for yourself. That's incredibly powerful. The professional impact of the retreat surprised me most of all. Participants had shared their experiences on social media and in industry circles, leading to new client requests and collaboration opportunities. My studio received feature coverage in a major design publication, with the retreat mentioned as an example of building creative community. I was invited to speak at design conferences about fostering creative communities, a new direction I hadn't expected. 3 months after the retreat, Great Aunt Eleanor called with unexpected news. "I've been thinking about Robert and Eleanor's wishes for the family property," she said. It was never meant to be a status symbol or networking place. It was meant to nurture creativity and connection. I know, I agreed, remembering the days when my grandparents were alive. I've spoken to the family trust lawyer, she continued. As the last surviving sibling, I have some say in how the property is used. I've requested that 1 week each summer be set aside for a creative retreat under your direction. I was speechless, tears coming to my eyes. Your grandparents saw your gifts from the beginning, Eleanor said gently. This is what they would have wanted. The trust lawyer confirmed the arrangement the following week. My parents surprisingly didn't fight it. Your retreat was impressive, my father acknowledged when I called to discuss it. Maybe it's time the property hosts something meaningful again. As I began planning the next year's Creative Minds retreat, this time at my grandparents' beloved property, I thought about the journey of the past year. What had begun with the pain of exclusion had led to the creation of something more valuable than simply being included in someone else's event. I had learned that sometimes rejection is redirection, that creating your own path can be more fulfilling than following someone else's, that chosen family can be as meaningful as biological connections, sometimes more so. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by my parents' approval or my siblings' acceptance. It was a part of me, shown through my creative work, my real relationships, and my courage to stand firmly in my truth. The family dynamics weren't perfectly healed. Such deep patterns rarely are. But there was movement, awareness, the chance for change. I had set boundaries without burning bridges, created space without closing doors. Looking out my apartment window at the city skyline, I thought about all the people who might be feeling excluded, diminished, or forgotten by those who should value them most. I thought about how the retreat had created a template that others might follow, a way of responding to rejection with creation rather than despair. Next year's retreat would be even more intentional, more inclusive, more creative. I opened my laptop and began drafting ideas, feeling my grandparents' spirits guiding my hands. Sometimes the most powerful response to being told there isn't enough space for you is to create a space so magnificent that others long to be included in it. A space built not from resentment, but from self-worth, not from competition, but from abundance. I had done exactly that. And in doing so, I had not only changed my family's perception of me, I had transformed my perception of myself. Have you ever been excluded from family events or made to feel like the black sheep? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and empowerment. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is the one that truly sees us. Share this with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for watching, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who can't see it, but by your courage to honor it anyway.